I'm Jason Bradford.
I'm Cher Miller.
And I'm Rob Dietz. Welcome to Crazy Town, where Trump and Musk just declared that Earth Day will be renamed Mars Day.
Are you sure it's not going to be Uranus Day?
Hi, this is producer Melody Allison. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town, where Jason, Rob, and Cher tackle crazy-making topics like climate change, overshoot, runaway capitalism, and why we're all deluding ourselves. Here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Cher. Happy Earth Day, guys.
Gee, thanks.
Yeah, this is very nice that we get one day.
It's the one day where we take a break from throwing all of our shit away and dumping tires into the river.
I take no breaks from doing those things.
That's not going to be a break. What are you talking about?
Sorry, yeah.
Anyway, I think we should celebrate and admire the Earth, at least, those of us who do care.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell our listeners that, Jason, you're heroically podcasting one-armed today. That's incredible.
He just sat there, dude. I had to set up everything for him.
I get weighted on now. It's great. Well, thanks for commenting on
wiping his mouth a little bit from all the drool,
Yeah. Sometimes it dries on the corners. It gets uncomfortable, crusty.
I mean, that's
Don't
the thing.
Talk about him as a hero.
That's a thing in podcasting. Some of us have to act like nurses for a chunk of the time.
Well, yeah, I did have shoulder surgery. I've got, stainless steel, titanium, plastic joint.
Nice.
But,
so you could just lift this table if you wanted to.
Months of rehab.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So what happened, dude?
Oh, I was chainsawing. There was an ice storm.
You chainsawed your shoulder?
Not quite.
Oh.
All right. So there was an ice storm about a year and a half ago.
Oh, yeah. I remember that ice storm.
Limbs came down, and I was with a pole saw trying to clear off the fence line. And I got a defect on my shoulder. It was a weak joint, and the joint just wore out. I didn't even know this was going to happen, but it just ouch. I lost it.
Like a tree limb or something fell on
a whole bunch. We're talking hours and over a period of weeks, and my shoulder hurt, and then suddenly it screamed at me.
Mm.
Yeah.
So if you had been using a handsaw instead of a chainsaw, you could have worn it out
much
way
sooner.
Faster.
Hey, that's a good question. I don't know, because the chainsaw allowed me to pole saw, allowed me to reach up. So I could have been pole sawing. It would have been terrible either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we got to get you off of fence duty. I mean, why not have a blackberry fence or some kind of hedgerow or something instead?
Well, this is what I think about. There are parts of the farm where there's a naturalized hedgerow where the birds have been pooping over, 100 years, and all these seedlings grow and turn into saplings. And there are places where, the livestock couldn't get out. And I look at that and I go, we should just do that. And then,
so
of course,
it's almost like a fence that just kind of grew on its own, basically?
A living fence. And, historically, they would call these hedgerows, and there was traditions in Europe to make them. But of course, no one knows how to do this because we all put in metal fences.
And think if a limb falls on it, just becomes part of the fence.
Yeah,
it
helps make the fence stronger.
Yeah.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, they still need maintenance, but they grow on their own, right? And they're alive. So I really admire that. I'm thinking to myself, I need to learn how to do that instead.
This story of yours, Jason, the story of the fence, is going to help us talk about the Earth today, which is what I want to do.
Of some help, because I'm kind of useless in many ways.
Yeah, it's true.
So specifically, I want to talk about two underlying principles that are part of your fence situation. One is entropy.
It's like an allegory.
And the other is self-organization. Okay?
Oh, wow.
We're kind of going to wonk out here a little bit on how the Earth works.
Okay, so
I feel
Rob,
like I'm disorganizing right now, but...
Can you just define entropy for me, or entropy?
Entropy, yes.
Entropy.
I will give it a shot.
Okay.
I did look up a definition on Physics for Idiots.
That's a good place to go.
It is.
That's like your homepage, right?
This is its definition. The entropy of an isolated system not in equilibrium will tend to increase over time, approaching a maximum value at equilibrium. So there we go, done.
Well,
everybody understands entropy.
No, you basically defined entropy using the term entropy, but what you were doing was you were defining the second law of thermodynamics, which unhelpfully uses the term entropy, which also has to be defined. So
That
this is a
true.
problem.
Okay, then you do it, Jason. You give us a definition.
In plain language, it's a general tendency for homogeneity and evenness, right?
Homogeneity? How many syllables are there in that word?
I'm trying my best.
This is plain language.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. So you often recognize it from things spontaneously kind of going from order to disorder, or
Like your shoulder.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or concentrated to disperse, let's say. So anyway, entropy is always increasing at a large enough scale.
Wait, okay. I think we need to give some examples, right? So
Yeah,
maybe
please.
the typical example is you hear to describe entropy is like ice melting at room temperature in a
Yes.
glass of water,
Yes.
or like a cup of coffee that loses its heat over time. Same principle applies. My cup of coffee right now, because
Yes.
I'm sitting here talking, is getting colder. I should be drinking it.
That's what I meant by homogeneity and evenness.
Right.
Okay? If there's a differential between different environments, it'll even out.
And that's what I meant by approaching a maximum at equilibrium.
Right, that's
Exactly.
exactly what you meant.
Yes.
Now, can I just say something about this like heat dissipating thing?
Oh, sure. Why not?
We talk a lot on this podcast about energy, and the energy transition, getting away from fossil fuels. And we know that one of the many issues with fossil fuels is like the conversion of energy, right?
Yes.
Of useful energy is not great.
Right.
So you have like an internal combustion engine. The amount of energy that actually goes into moving is pretty minimal.
Right.
The amount of energy that goes into like, creating electricity in a coal-fired power plant is at best 50% or
Right.
whatever. But you actually have this dynamic that happens with energy across the board, right? Because we're talking about the laws of physics.
Yeah.
Even if we substitute everything to be renewable energy, if we keep growing our energy use, we're going to run into this waste heat issue,
Right.
eventually. Like our friend Tom Murphy, who we've had on the podcast, kind of did some numbers on this. And I think he basically projected if we keep growing like 2.3% per year, which is fairly low, it's lower than the historical rate of growth in terms of energy demand over time, we'll get the temperature of the planet to a boiling point in
Right.
400 years.
So like a little technical explanation of what you just said is that whenever you convert energy from one form to another and try to use that transition for work,
Yeah.
which is what you're doing like in a coal-fired power plant, internal combustion engine, electricity, that there's an imperfect conversion. So not all of the energy that you're converting is actually usable for work. A certain proportion of it goes to waste heat. The example that everyone knows now
Yeah.
is that when you charge your phone, it can get warm. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, I have no
Yeah, okay. So that's the waste heat of the battery being charged. It's imperfect conversion from the electricity to chemical storage in your battery. So now everyone knows what I'm talking about because I used a phone example. You see?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
All I know is that if the Earth reaches the boiling point in 400 years, we'll still be denying that climate change is a problem.
Well, climate change won't be the problem
Yeah.
anymore.
But this is sort of an interesting thing. Like Tom's thing was like, yeah, let's say everything is PV and you
Right.
just have the sun. Photovoltaics.
So solar panels.
Yeah. And so you have the sun hitting panels and then there's electricity generated and everyone thinks that's clean and stuff. But just the act of running a car on a road produces waste heat.
Yeah.
Just the friction of the car moving. And so if you get the economy big enough, you don't have to be burning coal. It's just moving. The economy being moving in action is going to create heat.
Okay, so that's a quick primer on entropy and waste heat and all that.
Yes.
But what about the other side of this coin of how the Earth works?
Oh, self-organization.
Yeah, help us with that,
Kind of
sure.
like the opposite almost.
Okay, you want me to define it?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let's see. Go to Physics for Idiots and see what they say.
Self-organization is the spontaneous emergence of order or global coordination within a system, arising from the interactions of its individual components without external intervention or a central authority.
Well, that's better than my entropy definition.
It's
but
still a little wonky.
still
It's
kind of
still a little tough.
takes me back to high school or college. Yeah.
Well, I think there's some great examples that people are familiar with, like schools of fish or murmurations of birds. And I think, life is the ultimate example of this. And at different scales, you can think about life being a self-organizing. And there was a really good description of life and how unique it is by Jeffrey West in his book Scale. He says, quote, "Life is probably the most complex and diverse phenomenon in the universe, manifesting an extraordinary variety of forms, functions, and behaviors over an enormous range of scales." So, yeah, you think about all of us, any living creature, It's an assembly of incredible complexity, an organization with amazing coordination and control of parts, especially big multicellular organisms, or even a bacteria, for gosh sakes, from the raw materials of the environment, right?
Yeah.
Taking in atoms and molecules and assembling them in these complex ways.
The key thing is without having a central authority.
Yes.
It's not like there's a big boss man that's like...
Unless you're a creationist or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Oops.
says you.
Oopsies.
Yeah, life just evolved on its own.
Well, this has always completely amazed me because I've known about at least I couldn't define it, but I knew about the idea of entropy, that things tend to get disordered. You have all this organization of life that happens on the planet all on its own. I read that there's something like 8.7 million species of organisms on Earth.
We don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's just some kind of estimate, but we do know.
I can tell you how it's estimated if you want.
No, I don't think I care.
Okay.
Somebody's out there with they've got a clipboard.
One,
and
I'm not allowed to tell you. I'm not allowed to tell you.
Okay,
three.
Fine. I got it right.
I do know there are more than 60 species of rats.
Oh.
That one's known.
Look, we're solving this problem. This whole thing about that we don't really have an exact number.
Right.
We're on this.
We'll narrow it down.
Every year, more and more species go extinct thanks to us, right? So we'll get it, so it's a nice number,
Simplify.
like a Noah's Ark kind of size.
I have a sad face now.
Sorry.
Let me help you. I'll make your face happy by telling you some of the 60 species of rats that I looked up.
Oh,
great.
You got the black rat. You got the Australian swamp rat. You got the kangaroo rat. The Himalayan field rat. The naked mole rat.
I think that must be
the
different
pack
family.
rat. Ratatouille and the dirty rat bastard.
Okay.
Wait.
Okay.
You sound like the guy from Best in Show,
nuts.
listing all the nuts.
Peanut, pistachio nut, red and white. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the other thing that happens is that, beyond just individuals in a species, like an individual ratatouille, you get what are called superorganisms. This is the idea that
you mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, the Marvel Universe, DC.
Yeah.
Sure. Or alternatively, in a serious way, you could talk about the idea that individuals within a species are not standalone in a sense, but they are part of a greater whole that is coordinated. And the prime example of this is in ants, right? So you've got... And termites are also pretty good. And naked mole rats, actually. But these eusocial creatures that have divisions of labor. And my favorite example, the leafcutter ants. Have you guys ever seen leafcutter ants?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen them in real life, but many videos.
This is one of these things that is only on the American continent in the tropics.
Make America great again.
Yes. So you go to the lowland Americas and you'll be walking through lowland tropical forest and you'll see this area that's kind of denuded of the understory foliage. And when you see that, you're like, oh, I'm coming up on a leafcutter ant nest, which is like the size of a typical living room, maybe. Like they're big and they're kind of mound dirt. There's all these holes and the ants are going in and out with leaves and they're marching with leaves on their back that they're carrying and they're soldiers protecting the guarding. And what the ants are doing is they're going into their underground lair and they're feeding the leaves to a particular species of fungus, which is co-evolved now. And the ants and the fungi are completely codependent. And so what you have is a sense of all these ants have different little castes. Ants have different roles in society.
And they're even different sizes, right?
Very different sizes, yes. And then the fungus itself, right, is now part of this superorganism in a sense. It's a mutualism where neither of them survive without each other.
Right.
So
I think I read that happened like 15 million years ago, right? We talk about us domesticating animals, and we've talked about this on this podcast, right? The domestication of animals, tens of thousands of years ago or whatever. Right. 15 million years ago
or
this
more.
happened.
Yeah, no one's really sure. I can tell you how they try to figure out this.
Oh, no.
Using phylogenetic methods.
1 year ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a kind of mutualism, everyone's mutual codependency. So anyway, it's great. It's great. It's a very exciting example.
That there's a form. So we're talking about life as an example of self-organization, life coming into existence. Now we're talking about life working together in ways like these leafcutter ants as a superorganism,
Yep.
as a form of self-organization.
Yep.
But we also have ecosystems, right? Like
Yes.
ecosystems also, in a sense, act in a self-organized way. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of interactions between different species within an ecosystem.
Yes.
You guys have traveled a bit, right? You've gone, I think, Rob, you've gone out of California. That's been the extent of it for you, right? Jason, you've hopped all over the world, burning God knows how much.
Amazing. Kerosene.
I'm just curious, like, what ecosystems stand out for you guys in terms of things that you've spent time in?
Well, my favorite, just nostalgia-wise, the Blue Ridge Mountains in
Gonna break out in song?
in Appalachia. Yeah, bring in John
Ding, ding,
Denver.
ding, 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 ding.
That's not the song I was thinking of, okay?
West
Although
Virginia.
I have been on the Chattooga River where that was filmed. That was the Deliverance
Did you
theme.
squeal like a pig?
Okay, we're taking another turn here, darkness in this podcast. But no, it's a beautiful ecosystem. You have these hardwood forests, the leaves turn all kinds of beautiful colors in the fall. What's really neat, though, is the mountains are so old and all of the critters have adapted to this habitat really well. So you have the greatest diversity of freshwater mussels in the world. You have incredible amphibian diversity.
Yeah.
I feel like there's tons of mammals and birds when I'm there.
Yeah.
Seems almost like it's much more densely populated and diversely populated than the forests we have here in the Pacific Northwest.
It really is, yes.
Yeah, we almost have a kind of monoculture.
It's a little depauperate here because of how
I mean,
dry and isolated we are.
What we have that's amazing is the amount of biomass from the tree growth.
Yeah.
The Douglas firs and the cedars. I mean, just incredible amounts of
We're taking
fiber
care of
and
that
wood.
too. We're putting that on a diet also, Rob.
You are keeping
I'm
us
dark today.
You're keeping us on the Happy Earth Day theme here.
I'm dark today.
Mow it down, cut it down, throw it in the river.
What about you, Jason? You've been in a lot of cool ecosystems.
I became a big fan of what are called tropical montane forests, also known as cloud forests, when I was an undergrad. I decided, I'm going to grad school, I'm going to study these. I didn't know exactly how or why, but I ended up finding a way to do that. And I traveled and saw them. I saw the representative forests of this sort of ecosystem all through the Americas to Madagascar, Malaysia, the South Pacific, Australia region. So I love these and just amazing places. Really mossy, right? And the gnarly trees and the topography, is really interesting. These watersheds and the misting clouds and the views you get when the sun comes out and you can kind of look over the valleys. And the fact that they change so dramatically as you go from sort of lower elevation versions of cloud forest to higher elevations. And sometimes you break above tree line and you get these alpine habitats as well. So yeah, no, I just loved exploring those places.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome when you can hike above the clouds.
Yeah.
And you're looking down on all that.
Yeah.
That was my people come from the Levant.
Uh-huh.
Not this kind of climate that you're talking about at all, but when I went to Costa Rica and was in the cloud forest there, it's like, I wouldn't say I necessarily felt at home, but it was just incredible immersive experience.
So that got you too, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All the birds and the monkeys and just the life.
And it's sometimes because of the topography, you can look into the canopy easier here because sometimes you're on like a little ridge and you're looking down in the forest, where in the lowland forest, you're often just looking up all the time and you can't really see the canopy as well. So I felt it was in some ways more accessible.
Oh, that's cool. La-di-da. You guys get to go to Costa Rica. I just go to the southeast.
You go to Eureka.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the rise of self-organization through ecosystems, but I want to turn us towards human systems. You have all kinds of social institutions that arise kind of same way. They just self-organize. You could say that what we've done with the economy and business is an example of that, but I want to turn to kind of like the informal economy or the black markets that arise to meet some kind of need, and
Which you know well, right? I mean, you operate lots of black
the only
market
place
businesses.
where I get goods and services. So, examples of this would be drug trafficking, right? People want to take drugs. Black market emerges.
Potheads in a drum circle.
Amazing.
That's a great example of self-organization.
Yes.
You just, you go to one of these, for me, it was back in the day going to Grateful Dead shows, You get a bunch of these people with their little bongo drums and they're all banging, It sounds cacophonous and terrible, but all of a sudden, they start coming together and they get this beat. It's
the resonance.
What
all
a beautiful.
All of a sudden, when your LSD kicks in, it comes together, right?
Yeah. No, I've seen some big ones at UC Davis, the whole Earth Festival there. Oh my God, I go for 24 hours. I'm not kidding.
Oh yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well,
it's the height of self-organization.
It is. It's wonderful.
Well, besides drum circles and illegal drug trades, it happens in legitimate circles as well. Like there's this woman in the neighborhood who sells tamales. And maybe that's also illegal. I don't
get
know.
in trouble,
but
dude.
There's a lot of them.
Not with this administration.
But it's awesome. Like, people have a need for tamales and this self-organization happens. I get a tamale.
I support this informal economy that's not about
We're going to have lots more of it,
illicit
dude.
drugs, but people figure out how to
When
get
these
by.
tariffs kick
Yeah.
in.
Yes.
What about cities?
Yeah.
I mean, cities are probably the most recognizable way of like seeing how humans self-organize, right? You have, especially ancient cities that were probably little tiny villages to begin with and then slowly grow over time. And you look at London, for example, one of the largest cities, in the world. And it really started as a very small, I think it was a Roman outpost or whatever. And it grew from there. So you don't have any it's not like well-planned, organized, rectangular, urban planning design, right? It just kind of grew over time.
It is funny to think about, like a couple people just met up by the river and let's make a hut here. And then next thing you know, you got London.
Well, there's a Dire Straits song, a great one called Telegraph Road.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and that's a long time ago came a man on a track walking 30 miles with a pack on his back. And he put down a load where he thought it was best, made a home in the wilderness. And then it gets to freeways. And it's just this talks about someone makes a
Human
settlement
progress.
and then they attract another person. And great song. Oh my gosh. Album-oriented rock in the 70s. Unbelievable. Anyhow.
We are so old.
Okay.
All our references.
Hey, kids, listen to that.
I don't know what
Dire
you guys
Straits.
are talking. I know who Dire Straits is, but
It's
I've
one of their best
never
songs.
heard that song.
Oh, you have. It's one of their best. Anyhow.
Nope.
So this is interesting. You talk about cities because cities, we've talked about the leafcutter ants, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting about leafcutter ants is this dynamic that it happens in cities as well, where you've got this center place where you have their nests and you have like the feeding grounds and the fungus and everything. But guess what? They have to get leaves. Leaves are the resources that they have to go get, and they have to scavenge for leaves. And as the nest grows bigger and bigger, they have to go farther and farther to get leaves.
Yeah.
And so it takes more and more energy for them to get their leaves. And this is what cities have done. If you have a giant city, and Bill Reese has done really good work on this with the ecological footprint.
Yeah, he's our ecological guru friend who came up with that whole idea of the ecological footprint.
You understand that the bigger the city is, the larger the territory it has to draw from. And right now, this giant human superorganism of cities is drawing from the global economy with incredible complex flows of energy, resources, and trade.
So beyond the city, I mean, you're talking about as a superorganism, humans kind of act. It's a coordination between all these cities.
Exactly.
Right?
And all the small towns and all the industrial farms, this entire network has to function, right, for resources to flow into the cities.
Yeah, we're all now kind of locked into that superorganism.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think these two principles that we're describing, entropy and self-organization, describe a lot of what you see when you go out, walk the earth, and what's in front of your face is some derivative of those principles.
Yeah.
And I used to think that self-organization was some way of overcoming or fighting against the disorder or chaos of entropy. But I'm starting to see that it doesn't work that way. I mean, self-organizing systems like a human body, right, or the leafcutter ants or the city or any of them, they're entirely subject to entropy, right? Even though my body isn't immediately falling apart and scattering into molecules, it's doing it slowly over time.
Yeah.
But even though that's not happening immediately, it's still subject to entropy, right? So
does that explain why our hair keeps falling out?
Your hair's fine. What are you talking about?
I lose some hair.
Jeez.
Well, the thing about the body is it requires constant maintenance. So I have to take in what we would call low entropy fuels or highly ordered fuels, pork bellies, Slim Jims, bacon, Jolly Ranchers,
Jolly Ranchers.
Cocoa Puffs.
So those exist
Oh,
still.
they're so full of nutrition, dude. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so my body uses the energy and the nutrients
Pork
from
bellies are bacon. Why did you say pork bellies? It's just bacon.
It's the new recommended diet from the
That's the crazy town diet.
from the Trump administration. Get your Slim Jims.
No,
Get
we're
your
going to
Jolly
make America
Ranchers.
healthy again. What are you
Cocoa
talking
Puffs.
about?
Okay.
This is going to be illegal soon.
So assuming I can scrape a nutrient or two out of my bowl of Cocoa Puffs,
Yeah.
I am able to then build and maintain cells and tissues.
Barely.
But the entropy law still holds. And so in that process, I have to excrete high entropy waste. Otherwise,
Oh, here we go.
Otherwise known as going number 2.
Why is it number 2?
I don't know.
I think because you go number 1 first. I always do. How are we talking about this?
Why does it always come back to this on this
Wrong.
podcast?
I have
Can we come up with
problems.
number 2's a terrible? Can we come up with a better
Yes.
We can come up with an incredible. I mean,
Oh, no, here we go.
Thanks for opening the door. I mean,
back to the rats and the nuts?
One of my favorites is taking the Browns to the Super Bowl.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I always liked dropping the kids off at the pool.
That is a good one. Dirty bombing, cutting rope, baking brownies.
Okay.
Oh my God.
I'm not going to join in this. You've done enough. Done
Aye.
enough damage.
Well, ultimately, I hate to be. I'm the downer in today's
You've
podcast.
been horrible today.
Here's the thing. Like you said, you can't escape entropy. Ultimately, living organisms, they succumb to entropy through death, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And that's it, folks. We're done with our podcast today. Hope everyone enjoyed it.
But wait a second.
Don't the economists say in the long run we're all dead? That's
Yeah.
It's
the
true.
dismal science.
Yeah, but life goes on, Life goes on. There's something else ready to pick up the pieces. Life goes on. Oh.
So what does this all mean for humanity, for society? This is the real question I have when we're talking about entropy and self-organization. And the thing that I notice is that humanity is ramping up the complex systems. We're building out the cities. We're making a more and more complex global economy. And the thing is, it's all this, I'm putting air quotes around the term progress, all this industrial progress has this really heavy load of entropy that comes along with it. It's almost always at the expense of ecosystems.
Yeah, and we keep it at a distance from us, especially those of us who live in urban environments, right? You were talking earlier about bringing in resources, you know, from the outside, Jason, and sending our waste out. So we don't actually see the result of the entropy of that industrial system.
Rarely.
But, ecosystems, they haven't escaped entropy either, right? They just have figured out ways to deal with it more elegantly than humans have, They tend towards more complexity and diversity, more productivity and efficiency and resilience. They have processes that create high entropy outputs, but these get
Yes.
they get reused, they're composted, they're recycled. They're, you see the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle.
Yes.
These are examples of this. We haven't done that in ecosystems. If you think about it, even if a species disappears in an ecosystem, they adjust somehow.
Right.
Right.
That's what the diversity is so great. It's sort of like it gives them flexibility. So if one species disappears, there's something else there that's similar enough, right? And that's why that diversity is so important. It provides the resilience because it's like when you have an actor, there's a second, right? Like an important actor in a Broadway play or whatever, in case someone gets sick.
Yeah.
Okay, but in ecosystems, it's not just a second. There's a third. There's a fourth. There's all these backups to play that same role.
Right.
Okay.
Or the play changes a bit.
Yeah, it might just a little bit, but it doesn't.
Goes from a British accent to Scottish accent.
Correct.
It took me like 5 minutes to come up with the word understudy, which is what you're talking about.
Understudy. I couldn't.
An understudy like undergrowth in a forest.
Jeez, my God.
Deep.
Yeah, we should have a drum circle after this.
You just used a human system to talk about the elegance of an ecosystem. Just want to point that out.
I'm messed up, but I'm trying to help humans understand.
Let's give them a minute to go off on a rant about cities, okay?
Well, okay. So contrast, this is an important point. The ecosystems are running off of contemporary sunlight, and the waste products are reusable completely.
Right.
All right. Wonderful.
Even the death of an organism turns into nutrients for other life. Yeah.
Exactly. So That's why you say it's gracious, it's graceful, it's elegant. It can self-organize in perpetuity. Contrast that with urbanization. And Bill Reese, again, we mentioned before, ecological footprint. He called cities the emergent but dissipative structures that increase entropy in enormous ways. They're entropy engines in a sense. There's this myth out there that the modern cities, the bigger modern cities we have, are more efficient somehow. Because there's these things called allometric scaling laws, Kleiber's law, and it says that as organisms get larger, they actually become slightly more metabolically efficient. And so,
bigger is better, baby.
Bigger is better, baby. The problem is that none of these things are running off of sunlight or producing waste that is elegantly recycled. So
what are you talking about? All that plastic in the ocean? Is that not elegant? I mean, we're feeding sea turtles and
that's a cycle of
dolphins.
life
We're
right
plugging
there.
up blowholes with...
exactly.
So when you say ancient sunlight, you're talking about fossil fuels. We're basically taking old energy, right, that was stored in the ground, and we're burning it. So we're not living off of the energy that's landing on the Earth every day or every year.
And there was this article, a New Yorker, I think, called Green Manhattan. And there's this really good writer who lived in Manhattan, had some kids. They wanted to get out so where the kids had more space. They were in a little place. And they said, I was much more ecologically sane when I was living in Manhattan. My heating bill was lower. I didn't drive as much. And as much as I love the suburbs and all the nature I'm exposed to, I'm a hazard to nature. I'm destructive. I drive to the Blockbuster video store. Kids, you may not know what that means.
Yeah.
But the problem is, it doesn't matter that he's less energy and resource efficient in the suburbs as he was in Manhattan. Neither place is sane at all.
Right.
Because it's all running on ancient sunlight and it doesn't self-organize. It requires industrial processes to rebuild. It's madness to apply any sort of ecological laws and say, cities that are bigger are somehow
they're greener or more efficient.
Whatever. It's a whole system that's ridiculous.
I'll pile on the city critique for a second. The thing that I noticed when I was at a friend's place and he lived in a high rise and had a nice balcony that looked out over the city of Portland. And I remember standing up there and just being like, look at all the glass and asphalt and concrete and steel and just the hardscape. And I think about how sterilized that becomes from the perspective of being able to produce life, right?
No,
you don't have a nice oak tree growing out of the middle of the highway.
You have dandelions in the cracks.
Weeds. I see some weeds in the sidewalk.
Right. And we spray those if we can.
Oh, right, sure.
We take refuge in a few dandelions, But the idea is that the city can't really act by composting or reabsorbing wastes in any kind of elegant way, like you were saying. We built all this stuff and we've kind of locked ourselves into this entropy. Think about the difference between a tree that falls in the woods or falls, I guess, on a fence line in your case, Jason. And let's say it fell on the living fence, like we were kind of joking around, but it really could become part of it, right? You just have a tree limb that starts growing fungus. The insects then break it down and the nutrients get reabsorbed. Now think of a building falling in a city. What you just have a cracked up mess of steel and concrete, and the only way that gets reabsorbed is you have to drive a fossil fueled bulldozer to scrape it all up. And,
is it reabsorbed? No,
it goes to some landfill.
Yeah, it gets dumped somewhere, right?
It's just awful.
And now, here we are shitting on what humans have done in cities, You
mean we're dropping the kids off at the pool?
That doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
But I think we need to name this. This is a particular manifestation of how certain human societies have organized themselves because of this one-time lottery winning of tapping into ancient sunlight, fossil fuels, right? Humans have been around for a lot longer than, than these modern cities have, right? And if you look at indigenous cultures, they have figured out elegant ways of living within ecosystems, right?
I'm aware that there were cities prior to the fossil fuel era.
I'm not even just talking about cities. I'm talking about, other ways that humans have lived on this planet in interaction and actually as part of ecosystems. And in fact, you look at I think there's a lot of like idea that some environmentalists have of we need to preserve nature and have it be untouched or unspoiled by human hands. But the truth is that humans in many places around the world have been living as part of ecosystems and interacting with them like other species have, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that like we are incapable of both self-organization and doing self-organization in a way where we're in some kind of relationship with the rest of the natural world.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. It's possible. There are some very fascinating examples. And it's interesting, if you go to some of these places where there's relictual examples of this, we love it. We go to these Italian villages and go, wow, they built this by hand and it's beautiful, right? Yeah. And so you can imagine people living that way. But eventually, right, entropy wins. And if we really grok that, the big aha is to put our energy into systems, objects, and structures that can experience this entropy well. Like, so building something where you can maintain it with natural materials in your area that you can pick up, you can move, you can manipulate, and that can be composted if they have to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you.
Thank you.
Composting you.
Yes. Although I have some industrial waste now in my left shoulder.
Well, your old shoulder parts are growing a garden somewhere.
Well, we'll just have to lop off that one shoulder, discard that in the
and then the rest goes in a shallow grave.
The rest goes, we just toss you in the
Thank you. Shallow
in the ground.
Grave. Thank you.
So whether we like it or not, we're all playing this grand game of entropy and self-organization. And I find it fascinating to think about. But besides just understanding it, I think we have to ask, what do we do when we know that that's how the Earth works? Mm-hmm. So here around Earth Day, I want to think about how can you be a better Earthling in light of this understanding of entropy and self-organization?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is how out of whack we are power-wise, like how much power we use, and the idea that we need to dramatically shrink power demand we have. And so I had a proposal for this, which was to turn humans into sort of marmoset-like creatures.
All right, to actually shrink us, literally physically shrink us.
Yes, but that's going to take a long time.
Now, yes. I love marmosets. I remember visiting a zoo where they were allowed to run free in the ape house. There were little marmosets just hanging out in the trees, and you could get like eye to eye with this tiny little creature.
Did the marmoset look like Mark Andreessen? Yeah, because we talked about marmosets.
That's right.
When we did this episode about Mark Andreessen.
So we've gone over this before.
We have.
I think it's a little impractical, however. So the other idea I have, which I haven't expressed before, is that we need to modify our metabolism to be reptilian. So you ever feed a cat and it's like that cat needs to eat twice a day, right? Or it's going to go berserk.
Yeah.
You ever have a snake that's about the same size? You just give it a little treat like once every week or two.
You feed it the cat.
Sure. Yeah, or that.
That's a big snake.
Sure.
So reptiles just aren't they're cold-blooded, and so they don't have this baseline metabolism that is demanding constant energy. I like this analogy because it's the idea that what we've done with industrialism is we've sort of become addicted to constant energy, right? You can't shut it down, right? You can't shut the sewage system down or it all backs up, right?
Talk about entropy.
You can't, you can't shut the trucks down or the stores will starve. We can't shut the tractors down or it doesn't get harvested. So in other words,
turn off the AC.
Turn off the AC or we die of wet bulb temperatures. So this is the problem we have, is that we've locked in this power demand. We got to back out of that. Now, if we can't become a reptile, physically, we have to think of it more as how do we organize a society to be more able to sort of adjust to, okay, I've got a lot of energy now. I'm going to make hay when the sun shines. And now I'm going to chill out. I'm not demanding constant energy, sort of like a lizard can. A lizard can rest and then go feed and then rest. The way to think about it is maybe more like a hobbit. Become a hobbit and live in a shire. Does that make sense? Instead of an orc in an industrial kiln making weapons, right? Does that make sense? Composting toilets instead of like Toto. Is it Toto or Toro?
I don't know.
Oh, the ones that like
Yeah, heat your butt.
they heat your butt. They check your temperature rectally. Yeah,
Yes.
those ones.
It does make sense, although I'm kind of stuck on your go reptile. I think this is how the whole lizard people conspiracy theory got started.
It probably is.
Yeah.
That's
Don't
what you're
blink at me like that, Jason.
Sorry,
That's what
My eye
Jason's-
slits are vertical now.
Jason's advocating that. We should all become lizard people.
It's tricky. And I think part of it is actually a mind shift a little bit, right? It's like, and this is welcome to Crazy Town, right? This is what we experience, right?
Looking at the world.
Which is you look at the world, and when you understand that this high energy modernity that we've created, the denying entropy, basically not having systems that can compost themselves or whatever, it's like when you start realizing that we live in that kind of a world, right? It's hard to go back. But that's part of the step is to sort of look around you and realize what of these things, if we couldn't get all those constant inputs coming in, to maintain it or to rebuild the way, things were, the roads start falling apart and you get potholes. So what do? We
Asphalt.
we repave them again, right? So if we say we can't keep doing that, well, what would that entail? You know, and sometimes in the past I've joked about like, well, you look at some of the technology that we have in cities and you say, the elevator,
Right.
not really ready for the future. The escalator.
Yeah.
The escalator, if the electricity stops running, you could still take the stairs, right?
Totally.
So can we redesign a little bit in a way where if the roads are starting to fall apart, we actually let them fall apart. We decide, let's turn these into walking or biking paths instead.
I have an interesting story about this. I was in Willits like 20 years ago.
Willits, California.
And they were working on a new hospital, like a beautiful new hospital, modern new hospital. And they put me on some committee to like talk about it. And I said, you got to make sure that the windows can open and the doors aren't on these automatic, like you have to make stuff manual.
Right.
And everyone looked at me like I was a lizard person.
Right.
Which you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're like, no, we can't do that. We can't do any of that. That's illegal. I'm like, okay, sorry.
That's illegal.
Pretty much.
Right.
And, there's other ways of doing this. Your lawn, there's ways of practicing, even if you're in a situation where you're living in a suburban environment, for example.
Yeah.
You could create your ecosystem on your own property in a sense that can maintain itself rather than one that's going to need all these input that we put into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like where you're going with that, Asher. You talked about it's a need to change the mindset. And I've been working on my own demented mind a little bit by reading the works of Robin Wall Kimmerer, who we've talked about before. She wrote this incredible book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which looks at how do you combine the latest science in ecology and kind of stuff we're talking about, how the world works, with indigenous lifeways and worldviews, and really fascinating stuff. And her follow-up to that book is a really slim, cool little book called The Service Berry. And it's about how a service berry, how it creates sort of an economy of its own. And it's an economy that's all about reciprocity, and the exchanges have this elegance that we've been talking about. And one of the things that she talks about in that book that really struck me and is staying with me is she talked about how she was giving this talk at a Department of Natural Resources. And
we're getting rid of that. So
we are getting rid of it, but she also kind of wanted to get rid of it.
Oh,
Not do away with it, but to rename it.
right.
And rename it the Department of Earthly Gifts.
Yeah. The idea
I
of
like
resources.
that. I hate that term, natural resources. I always have.
She said some of the students there was almost like a palpable sense of, relief.
Yes.
And the whole idea is if you're talking about natural resources, objects, entities to be used in our economy, it's easy to chew them up, treat them like nothing. If you see it as gifts from nature, then you have to have gratitude for having received this gift.
And reciprocate, probably, unless you're an asshole.
Yeah, how do I give back? And I think small changes in worldview like that, if you can really start looking around at everything as earthly gifts, that can add up to the kinds of things you were talking about, Asher, of like, hey, instead of building out some infrastructure that has no elegance when it decays, how about having something that works within the context of the place that you are? Or just let the lizard people run it. I don't know. So, okay, we've talked about how we can maybe be a little bit better Earthlings, knowing about entropy and self-organization. So to kind of conclude with our Earth Day theme here, I was wondering if you guys, maybe each one of us, could have a do and don't to celebrate Earth Day.
Okay, I'm going to go. I have an idea. Do find a wild growing plant where you live that you can safely forage and eat it. Okay, that's my do.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah, don't pick any hemlock.
Okay.
Or spotted
Does it have
mushrooms.
to be a plant? It can't be like an animal?
Well, no, I go ahead. Whatever, fungus, but make sure you know what you're doing, especially with the fungi.
I would just an aside on this. I was really confused about hemlock because you have hemlock trees, and people make tea out of the hemlock needles,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Hemlock is an invasive species in the carrot family, and some people mistake it for things like fennel, or because it looks like that. But you will die if you give too much. If you have just the right amount, you'll just have a big nap.
Well, let's stick with your original. Don't eat hemlock.
Yeah, don't eat hemlock.
A big nap.
Yeah.
What's your do and don't?
Before I do that, I want to say something else, which is, we were just talking about kind of embracing entropy in a sense, or designing for it. But there's the self-organization piece I want to bring up again, because we're actually in a situation now where we've created these complex, at very large scale, we talked about the human superorganism, right? So we're now all very dependent upon these large scale, very complex systems to deliver our essential needs. And we're going through a situation right now where that's breaking down, right? And so self-organizing, if you think about trying to practice self-organizing, a great place to do that is in your local community, right? I think we're going to need more of that. So now the ideal would be self-organizing to embrace entropy in your local community, right? So designing together things that can compost themselves elegantly or be repurposed in more natural ways. So I just want to mention that because I think there are lots of opportunities
Gives me a job, too. I can go on the worldwide circuit telling people the definition of entropy from Physics for Idiots so that they know how to act on what you're talking about.
Okay, so the do's and don'ts. I mean, this is a very simple thing, but I think it gets to what we're talking about, the practice of observation and sitting with. And that is, next lovely weather day, go outside, sit in a place where you can observe the interaction of life around you. And that can include human life, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to go deep into the woods somewhere away from all people, but just if you sit still in a space, in a place, and you observe those interactions, you'll discover, I mean, you start attuning, for example, to bird life around you, even in a city, and you start realizing there's actually thriving life all around that. We just tend not to stop to observe it or listen to it. On the don't side, maybe don't be in, at the very top of a skyscraper when the power runs out.
Oh, God, I know.
Sorry, anybody that lives up high like that. Okay, I'm going to give my do and don't, but I'm going to flip it around because I want to be a rebel like a lizard person. So I'm going to give my don't first, which is don't get sucked into empire building. And what I mean by that is, maybe you've figured out how to play the current economic game that's happening in high energy modernity. And you've accumulated a lot of money, or you've been successful on the black market, trafficking in drugs or whatever. Don't try to expand your empire because it'll only be subject to entropy, and you're going to find that your time is just sucked up by trying to maintain your empire.
You see that in all the movies about this, The Godfather and stuff.
Yeah. And I don't feel like empire has to be that big. Could just be, I want to get a second home somewhere. Or maybe I want to buy another piece of property. And you're either doing all that maintenance yourself, which is, like I said, sucking up your time, or you're subjugating a bunch of other people, exploiting them or whatever, and having them deal with it. And that's the pathway to being a supervillain. What you could do instead, and it's funny because it doesn't sound like an Earth Day thing, like go plant a tree, but it's to simplify and be nimble. The small creatures are the ones that survive the disaster, not the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
That's how mammals came.
That's right. Little shrew-like creatures.
So be simpler, declutter, take down your empire, even just a little bit. Maybe just declutter one item.
Cool.
I'm going to start with you. I'm going to get rid of you, Rob.
How am I part of your community and helping with your self-organization?
Well, you're a lizard. Come on.
Are you tired of the bloated, impersonal, ecologically ruinous, and ultimately unresilient projects that have characterized housing and land development for the past century? Are you looking to reside in affordable, beautiful, and cleverly designed dwelling and communities where you can self-provision from a biodiverse landscape and disconnect from the globalized flow of industrial goods and services? If this is your dream, then join us at Shire Property Development and Realty Group. As an investor in our properties, you will be comforted to know that our team has vast and deep expertise in all aspects of living without high-energy modernity and can select and build infrastructure with better odds of persisting through the bottlenecks of the great unraveling. And as an owner-resident, you'll enjoy the challenge of, we like to half-jokingly say, living like a hobbit, while appreciating the security this brings as the proverbial, quote, doo-doo strikes the blower. Shire Property Development and Realty Group. Isn't it about time people with capital and expertise did something useful for everyone else?
First come, first serve, but preference will be given to short people with big furry feet.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Crazy Town. Da, 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 Crazy Town.